Welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered, the podcast exploring what really happens to your identity, ambition, and career when you become a mother. Matrescence is the transition into motherhood, and it's one of the biggest identity shifts a woman will ever go through. Yet, when it comes to our careers, it's still barely understood. So often, motherhood gets framed as something to push through and bounce back from.
We think it's something else entirely, a capability shift, and we think it's time to name it and to talk about it properly. I'm Rose, coach, consultant, and researcher completing a master's in organisational psychology.
And I'm Bianca, a chief marketing officer, pregnant, and living this experience in real time. Each episode, we take one belief about motherhood and work that doesn't hold up under scrutiny and break it down properly.
Using research, lived experience, and honest conversations about what sustainable high performance actually looks like when your identity is shifting.
Welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered. We're really glad you're here. So today's episode is on a topic that really feels personal to me. We're going to be talking about the first trimester, everything that you have to do to hide within the first trimester, the ways that you have to mask at work, and the fact that your physical symptoms can be really intense. And that was definitely the case for me. So looking forward to getting into the discussion, and I have a lot to say.
So, Bianca, how are you feeling this week?
This week, I'm feeling heavy, getting into birth planning and starting to think about all of those options. There's a lot of considerations, but I'm feeling good overall. Heavy, but good. How are you feeling, and what have you been learning this week?
So, I'm feeling good, thank you. I'm happy the sun is starting to shine a little bit and bloom into spring, which is topical for our next researcher. So, this week I have been diving into some research from a Stanford professor called Nick Bloom. He is quite vocal on the positive effects of working from home. And for me, in the context of my research, when I'm talking to women who are able to perform well, one of the key things they tell me is that flexibility is so important. It's about outputs, not hours. So this piece of research is particularly interesting because obviously we've been talking a lot in the news. And I think we mentioned on our last episode around the falling fertility rate. Now, this piece of research has found that working from home is linked to higher fertility. So adults who work from home at least one day a week have higher realized fertility and planned fertility. And that is thought to increase by 30%, which is quite high. Having that flexibility and being able to not factor in commutes into childcare, which is huge. And the impact is even stronger when both partners have access to remote work. So not only is it economically positive, it's better for higher performance generally, but it's also linked now to higher fertility, which is a bit of a win.
So fascinating. And that feels really linked to today's episode and the topic that we want to explore around the first trimester, because I can say hand on heart, had I not had the flexibility to work from home, I would have struggled 10 times more. Because, getting into it, the first trimester, for anyone that's experienced it, is physically taxing in a way that personally, I haven't found my second and third trimesters to be. And I think that when I was really in the throes of it, so a bit of context, working as a chief marketing officer, having a lot of demands on my time, kicking off a big rebrand project that I've mentioned in previous episodes, where the pressure was on. There was a timeline, there was a deadline in my mind that I hadn't made anyone aware of yet, but it felt like this ticking time bomb. And trying to balance that while keeping it all secret and feeling a lot of sickness, a lot of fatigue, and all of the emotional upheaval, processing the great change that had suddenly happened, was probably one of the loneliest times of my life. Because I think when you go from that initial positive pregnancy test, I was actually alone when I found out I was pregnant. And I was very much in the mindset, I'll just take a test, it'll be fine, whatever. Didn't kind of want to process it. And then there it was. And then it all became very real, very, very quickly for me. But then as the weeks continue, just the level of fatigue cannot be overstated. Your placenta is growing, like you're growing a new organ. You're doing that while emotionally, as I say, everything is changing and you can't tell anyone. I'm trying to think of a set of circumstances in a human's life where you have that much to contend with.
You're absolutely right. And it is the most neurobiologically intense period of the entire process. And we've built a societal convention that asks women to experience it entirely alone. So if you think about bereavement, illness, divorce, job loss, all of that comes with some sort of expectation of acknowledgement and support. But these 1 to 12 weeks are the complete opposite. It is a cultural instruction to perform it alone, completely normally, as if nothing else is happening. And it's genuinely the most transformative part of the process.
Tell me more about that. When you talk about the transformative part, if we're looking at it neurologically, how do you mean? What do we know so far about this period of time?
This isn't hiding a secret. It is managing the biggest neurological upgrade of your life in silent mode. And that silence is not accidental. And it's built, I think, by three things. So I think it's genuine medical caution. So things like miscarriage are a real risk in the first 12 weeks. Professional self-protection, which I know we're going to go into. Discrimination on, how you're going to be perceived in the workplace. And it's pretty well documented that that is a perception. And
Yeah.
then social convention that has conflated the two without ever questioning whether they should be conflated. So when we unpack the actual neuroscience, I know we spoke about this, I think it was in the first episode, but your brain literally changes shape. It gets slightly smaller.
Mhm.
And that's not a lack of intelligence or getting less intelligent. It is about a fine tuning, pruning process that, you know, helps you prepare for your caregiving responsibilities. So it increases things like prioritization, social cues, empathy, that sort of thing. I would love to hear your experience of brain fog and how you navigated that, because I know that is one of the big things.
Well, I love these facts already. And I just want to say to you that in one of our previous conversations, you likened this brain, I don't even want to call it shrinking, but changes and pruning to like this beautiful rose bush. And I've had that visual in my mind ever since. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to refer back to it. Brain fog for me came in thick and fast because my exhaustion levels were like nothing I've ever experienced. From the moment I found out I was pregnant, which was around the 5-week mark, although we know it's not an exact science, and there's lots of debate around date of conception all the way through to due dates, and that's a whole other topic we could get into. But I was around 5 weeks pregnant when I found out. And I remember feeling at times like I had to crawl into bed during the day with my laptop just to be able to continue functioning. And then when I had calls, I would quite literally crawl out of bed, make myself look somewhat presentable, and pretend like nothing was happening. So, what I was going through at that time was the sense of desperately wanting to hold on to my professional capacity as if nothing had changed when everything was changing for me. And for anyone listening who is in their first trimester, coming out of it, going into it, in the thick of it right now, I really want to hold your hand and say that you're not alone with the depths of the physical changes that are coming up for you. Having to deal with nausea, food aversion, your body changing rapidly in ways that you don't recognize, all of the emotions in the world, the adjustments that you have to go through psychologically while keeping your job going in a way that no one can notice. I go back to this. I cannot think of what is more difficult to try and balance all at once. So, brain fog for me was something I tried to really resist because I didn't have the information that I have now at this point in my pregnancy around matrescence. And I didn't, crucially, this is such a big point, I didn't have the self-compassion or the empathy for what I was going through, which made it worse. Because
Of
when you're
course.
in this cycle of putting all this pressure on yourself to look the same, sound the same, be the same, when you are fundamentally changed, it's actually a really upsetting amount of pressure that we put on ourselves. So I did have a lot of brain fog. I had to get very organized in ways that I wouldn't typically, of making lists about everything. Because it was almost like with my fatigue and how I was feeling, I didn't fully trust myself to be able to carry all of it. And I wish if I could go back, and this is what I say for anybody listening who's in this, I wish I could go back and say, take a bit of this pressure off, please. Stop bullying yourself to be the same person when you can't be and you shouldn't be. I know the hiding part is hard. So that's a bit about brain fog. And what I will add as well is that the waiting process for listeners in the UK to access NHS services and start that process with a midwife felt like a lifetime. It felt like it took so long to get that first appointment. I felt like I was kind of living in the void and I was waiting to be able to share more, to be able to get more care. And it really messed with my head.
Yeah, because like, I guess at that point as well, whilst the test is telling you something and you're feeling something, like, no one else has confirmed that it's real, it's happening. It's got to be quite a daunting process. And then you've got this whole stress and anticipation for that first 3 months. 3 months is a long time.
It's a long time. And every day, this is not an exaggeration and it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but I will, for the good of the podcast, admit it. Every day I was on GPT checking the stats of the probability of this pregnancy going ahead. So you get really obsessed with the weeks going by. But at that phase, you're also obsessed day by day. What's the likelihood of this going ahead? And because everybody has a story, if it's not you personally, it's your mum, it's your sister, it's your friend, it's your colleague. We've all been touched in some way by baby loss and miscarriage. We know how common it is. And there's so much fear. And one of the funny things that I think looking back, I would tell myself is to not be so afraid to tell people in my life. And in the end, I don't know if this is helpful for people, but I want to share it in case it is. In the end, I adopted a rule that said to myself, I will tell anyone that I would tell in the event of a loss. So if I would tell a friend, I actually lost a baby. This has happened to me. I went through a miscarriage. Then I would tell them about the pregnancy too. And that kind of became my rule of thumb because there's so much, as you say, noise around don't tell, keep it to yourself, the risks of telling before 12 weeks. And then actually, when you get to 12 weeks, the next one is like, yeah, but have you had your 20-week scan? Have you had like the detailed analysis that everything is going well? So really, you're jumping through hoop after hoop after hoop. So,
Yeah, so I've actually heard advice. I mean, I've never been through it myself, but not to say anything until after the 20-week scan.
and that's what I did at work, which we'll
Mm.
get onto. But that in between, that loneliness, that, as you say, this is real, but only to me and to my partner. And I don't know exactly how to share. I found that very isolating, waiting for some kind of care. Did do the private scan at around 7, 8 weeks and got to hear the heartbeat, which made it feel more real. But I was still balancing so much. And then the other funny, like strange thing was hiding the fact that even though you're not showing, I mean, it's funny when you look at it now and you're like, yeah, I felt like I had a big bump. And now I look at myself and think, I was a bit bloated. I didn't have a huge bump at all. But psychologically, you're looking for any bit of evidence that you're growing and changing in that way. And that got in my head too, because I started thinking about everything that I would wear to work. And one of the ways that I think people at work could tell that I was pregnant was that I was wearing uncharacteristically baggy clothes for me, trying to hide this. And I actually think choices of clothing sometimes are more about us having like camouflage than actually
Mm.
needing to hide something physical in that first trimester because nobody's looking. If you are fortunate to have people in your life that you would share with about a loss, share with them about this pregnancy, bring them in, have people that are enthusiastic and excited around you and help you make it feel more real because it is a lonely time. It's a strange time and you need loved ones around you to uplift you and to celebrate you and see you.
I think whoever is listening to this, and if they are in a position where they have, close friends and family around them, I'm sure that's a no-brainer. But I think where it becomes difficult and particularly isolating is at work. If you are like you, Bianca, like you're a senior female leader, your dynamic is slightly different because you worked with your partner. So you had someone at work who knew what was going on. But if you navigating those first 12 weeks without someone internally that you can go to and be like, I'm feeling sick. This is not morning sickness. This is all day sickness.
Okay.
I cannot focus. I have got brain fog. I am just not feeling myself. I'm not. And actually, I know we talk a lot about the neurological upgrade that comes with matrescence, but we haven't actually touched upon until now the physical changes and like the impact that has on people's identity and their confidence. You're going through all of that transition so silently within the workplace. It's something that for some reason we've made systemic, the most neurobiologically intense period. It's wild.
We know that there is a motherhood penalty and perception shift in the workplace when we announce our pregnancies. So I don't have the answers for this, and it's something we can debate and discuss, but it would have helped me so much had I been able to be honest sooner about what I was going through. Because I remember being in C-level meetings talking about strategy and really some quite cognitively intense topics and feeling sick to my stomach because of my food aversion, because I did not feel myself. And my body was full of progesterone. I'm talking like the pain of just like your boobs, everything is expanding. And at that point, because you're so afraid of your pregnancy as well, your hypervigilance is an overdrive. So any little slight pain, any bit of like spotting, and you're doing that in a working context that requires you to be on your A game, we have to rethink and reimagine what this can look like. Because the reality is, if you were to have a miscarriage, you might not ever tell your employer that either.
Coming back to the neurological changes that happen, the hormone progesterone, that directly reduces neural recruitment into the prefrontal cortex, amygdala, which is your threat response,
Mhm.
your fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and your fusiform gyrus. So these are the regions that are responsible for that complex decision making, emotional processing, and also face memory. So I think you said in episode 1, I know this person's face, but I can't remember their name. That
Yes,
is what that is there.
a lot of that. And then because that compassion piece hasn't come in and you haven't eased into pregnancy and you don't have your full support network, a lot of beating myself up, I remember to that point, silly little things, sending an email and referencing Monday, October 20, whatever, and someone replying, wait, that date's a Tuesday. I'm thinking, I would normally always check that, but honestly, the brain would do this thing. My brain would do this thing where I could check something, and 2 seconds later, it couldn't carry it over between tabs so that it was gone. You know, you might just look at a date on a calendar and say, right, let me just transport that over to my email. Your brain typically doesn't even have to think about doing that. But mine was almost short circuiting, not able to get there because of everything else that was happening. And
Mm.
then once we do grow the placenta and our babies aren't as reliant on our own hormones and they've got their own ecosystem, you feel the shift very profoundly. But that bit in between when it's your hormones, you're flooded with progesterone, as you say, it can feel really
Not just
scary.
your hormones, your nutrition, everything.
Everything. And you can feel like your brain isn't your own a bit. So going to work in some of these meetings, and I would say to myself, just an hour to be on form. And then you could go sit in the disabled toilet for a bit until your next meeting. Just 1 hour where you have to just exist. And so funny, somebody on my team, when I told her eventually that I was pregnant around 20 weeks, she said, I didn't think you were pregnant, but I did think that you went to the toilet a lot. It was just having a moment to not be masking. And women everywhere are going through this. And when it comes to a leadership position where you're used to being on your A game, that's your identity. That's where you derive your confidence. My sense of self.
It's just how you operate, like, that you don't know any other way to operate.
You don't know any other way of operating. Suddenly it's like my mind isn't my own. I can't tell anyone. I'm alone in this. And I don't want them to be onto me because I'm not ready to tell them either. Very complicated.
So complicated and so underappreciated.
Yes. And so if someone's been through it and they're hearing this, I just want to share all of this in solidarity, to be honest, and say you're so not alone. I've been the person in the disabled toilet. I've been the person crawling into bed just to gain some relief between meetings. I have felt shame. I felt embarrassment. I felt insecure about my ability to perform at the very time that you don't want anyone to know anything's changed. Because suddenly threat response, as you say, amygdala overdrive kicks in. And more than ever, you want your job to be going really well before you have that conversation. And it's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, you almost wanna prove yourself, so once you get to that point of announcement, you're like, "But see, I've been doing it fine for 3 months, I'm gonna be fine for another 6 months, and then when I come back, I'm gonna be even better."
Well, it's exceptionally performative. And you do have that sense of when I go into that conversation, I want to be in as strong, a invaluable position as I can. Because when I'm putting my cards down on the table and I'm having to essentially what felt to me as a leader as almost a disruption to service, which is such a clinical way of putting it. It's so transactional, but that's how it feels. Exactly as you say, but I've been doing it for 3 months. These have been the toughest 3 months, and you haven't noticed a change, so why would you notice a change moving forward? Again, such a surface level conversation. The more we get into this topic, the more I think, "Oh, that is so missing a trick." Because people ask you, "How are you feeling? How are you feeling?" And I'd love your thoughts on whether it's our responsibility or theirs or both to actually answer that honestly, because I was always, "I'm fine. How are you? How was your weekend?" Batting it away. But had I been able to sit there and say, you know what, I physically, the first trimester has been really hard for me. I am eating things that I would never normally eat. My routine is completely disrupted. My sleep is disrupted. I can't, the energy that I do have, I have to focus on working. But when I am working, I've actually gained this different perspective. Small things like that that I think are actually massive conversation shifts.
I agree, but I caveat by saying you have to have psychological safety there. I'm gonna quote Brené Brown here. She talks a lot about vulnerability, but it's not just about being super vulnerable with people all the time, letting them know exactly what you're feeling, you're wearing your heart on your
Yeah.
sleeve. It is vulnerability, but within boundaries. And those boundaries are only created through building trust and psychological safety. So I think if you have an environment where you can say, actually, I'm experiencing this way and I'm starting to think differently. And if I'm really honest, I didn't think like this before. To have those conversations, you've got to be able to have the relationships in place where you feel that you have a voice and you can add value and that you're not going to be judged. And I know we spoke a little bit about the motherhood tax and about masking,
Yes.
but unfortunately, that is a systemic issue. Some of the data that we've got around 74,000 women each year lose their jobs due to pregnancy or maternity. That's up 37% in 10 years since 2016. So this is all some data that has been sourced from Pregnant and Screwed, which is a fantastic not-for-profit organisation.
Amazing organization.
And 35.9% of women feel that they are sidelined, demoted, or experience negative treatment while pregnant. And then 32% of employers believe that pregnant women are generally less interested in career progression. So if we've got this data that frames it in a way as a career disruption. And as we've spoken about before, this is absolutely a neurological upgrade and all of the strengths that you develop through matrescence. B- But people have to know that first. And there is
Mhm.
so much to change systemically. I do agree with you. I think if we could have those honest conversations, people could show up, they're not masking. There's a huge amount of effort that goes into masking, which will inevitably lead to burnout. And again, the business impact that has is really expensive. It's like 118 billion pounds a year it costs the UK economy. So what I'm trying to say with all of this is, yes, I love the idea of being vulnerable. I believe the vulnerability has to come with boundaries. And I don't think that societally we have those boundaries in place because we have all of these biases, these preconceptions around pregnant women, their ambition, how they want to perform that are just absolutely inaccurate, like wrong. Like we know that matrescence strengthens so many capabilities, leadership capabilities, that the narrative has to change in order for society to understand and recognize that.
I think you're totally right because as much as I love the idea of having been able to say these things, I still didn't. And I'm working in a relatively psychologically safe environment where it is very family focused. And there was a lot of celebration and support of my pregnancy. And I still felt that I couldn't. And I think with this question around the first trimester and when do you tell, is it about safety really and viability of the pregnancy? Or is it all just a big social construct that we've created around secrecy? And I look at that and I think, wow, that as you said, there's so much work to be done. I also feel that when it comes to conversations around careers and yes, matrescence, yes, what's happening to us, you mentioned a really sad point there around the employer perception that women are disengaging when they become pregnant. I can hand on heart tell you that that couldn't be further from the truth for me. When I found out I was pregnant and I was in the depths of the first trimester, feeling terrible, my survival instinct, not just for me now, but for the second heartbeat in my body, for my baby, was immense. And when I say that, it might sound really animalistic, but I'm actually talking about it professionally as well. My
Mm.
instinct to protect, to
Preserve your
provide,
reputation.
preserve my reputation, be on my A game, do a good job, stay focused, got bigger because it wasn't just about me anymore. I just want to challenge the employer mindset on this for a second. How am I going to get that? How am I going to build security and stability and a really, really, really good base for me to feel comfortable and confident to become a mother and bring life into the world? Financially, like this comes down to money. So you best believe that when I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, I'm pregnant, I'm not zoning out or tapping out. I'm thinking, I'm doubling down. Now my instinct wants to go even further in my ambition and what I can do. And I want to say this and put this on record because that's so what I've been going through. And a mother's survival instinct that kicks in really early on, that is a force. And it's a link to career. It's a link to us wanting to keep our jobs. And it's a link to us wanting to progress. So the way we're looking at it from the employer perspective is the entire wrong way round. And I know that now because I'm living it. Let's flip that on its head for a second. I've got more to be ambitious for now. Why are we not viewing it that way around? And the more that you share in terms of data and neurobiological changes and what the ways we're being perceived, it just makes me angry because I think we're getting it completely wrong.
We've still got a lot of work to do understanding the strengths that come with matrescence, understanding the shift in ambition, seeing it role modeled in organizations. There's more CEOs called John than there are female
Okay.
CEOs. We've come a long way, but we're still so far away from it being where we need it to be.
We have to upgrade our thinking on this because the data also shows that we have so much of an economic contribution now. So that old school way of thinking and perceiving us doesn't actually stand against the data anymore. So linking this back to first trimester and this concern we have around our perception, you're totally right that we have huge societal prejudice to contend with. But at the very least, what we can do for ourselves and our internal worlds, I feel, is extend a bit more compassion and understanding for what we're going through. People aren't watching as closely as we think. We don't owe anyone a timeline to share our news. If you're going through it, give yourself some grace and extend that compassion to yourself because if you were thinking about any human being whose brain was literally changing shape, who was feeling sick morning, afternoon, and night, how much respect would you have for them? And yet we don't apply it to ourselves. So I think that that's a key point for me with this topic. And I can't say when the right time is to say, but have your support system around you and know that, yes, there are societal prejudices and expectations that you have to contend with. But there's a lot more that I think could be done to support women, even in their social circles around this time when you are waiting and you do feel in isolation.
I know of friends and colleagues who've got to that 12 weeks and there's been no heartbeat, and I've
Yeah.
never lived through this experience myself, but I've seen how heartbreaking it is. So one hand, part of me really understands the want to keep things to themselves, to keep them secret, but the other part of me is like, it's so lonely and isolating, and the potential to lead to burnout of you kind of doing that constant masking is not looking after yourself. And I've said this
Yeah.
before, but well-being is not just about products. It's very much about practice, and looking after yourself first and foremost is the most important thing. I understand the medical caution side of it. What I would love to influence in any way that we possibly can is the social protection, the reputational protection that people feel that they have to wear their mask because they're worried. I know of people who have been in meetings who've been talking about, we've got this trip to India, we've got this big project in 6 months' time that we're going to do X, Y, and Z for. And they're having to sit in meetings, nodding along and being like, yeah, that sounds amazing. Let's start, the ball rolling on this. All the whole time they know that they're pregnant. There's no way they're going to be able to go to India at 9 months pregnant. I think there's also an element of guilt that comes with it from wearing that mask, because at
Yeah.
times you may have to drift into lying to protect yourself, and there's something quite complex about that.
There is. So well said. Find your outlets where you don't have to mask. Professionally, there are reasons, as you say, why we have to protect ourselves. But find the places where you can just take the mask off. Beyond just being at home with your partner, I would say, like even if it's one person outside of your relationship where you can just say to them, okay, I'm 8 weeks pregnant. I'm really scared, or I'm really worried. I'm not sleeping well. This is why, or this is the food craving I'm having, or I'm getting these really weird headaches, whatever it might be, just to bring to the light, to make
And
you
it
feel the load you're carrying in that first trimester is a little bit lighter.
and I would say as well, like something practical that you could do. So if you don't feel that you have a support system around you, or you just wanted a different voice, if you feel that you're saying a lot of things to your partner, maybe your partner's not super empathetic or supportive or uh, whatever. Almost all organizations will have an employee assistance program, and they are anonymous. You can call them, Some are better than others, but if you did want to speak to somebody, they are confidential and can be really useful tools. And there are coaches, all across different networks that specialize in supporting women through these transitions. So I appreciate not all women want to take up coaching, but that is also
Yeah.
an option if it's something you're really working through.
I think it's great advice. And to build on that, I would only say that we worry so much about pregnancy viability and that links to secrecy. But once you have that positive test, you are forever changed, no matter what the outcome. There's no
Agree.
way that whether the pregnancy is viable, whether it sadly isn't, you're not going to have to go through some real processing and some real shifts and some real emotions. So start acknowledging them as soon as you can. Don't feel like you have to bury this. I think the EAP reference is a great one. I've never thought of it. And it's kind of something that as an employee, you just look at and think, oh, it's a standard kind of policy doc they have. I'm never going to utilize it. It's a great piece of advice. But don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to actually start those conversations because when you have the positive pregnancy test, you are changed forevermore, no matter
True.
what happens next. So acknowledge it, talk about it, and remember that you're really not as alone as you think in it. And that's what I wanted to put across in this episode more than anything. So, Rose, we've covered a lot in this. And as you can tell, it's quite an emotive topic for me because it changed everything for me. And it was, as I say, very isolating. For listeners, what's a reminder that you want to leave them with? Can be anything, practical tip, something that really has stood out to you in your research, or just some words of wisdom.
I think to summarize this, the first trimester is not the waiting room before the real pregnancy begins. It is the most neurobiologically intense period of the entire process. So, your progesterone effects on cognition, so that's what we spoke about earlier, that amygdala threat response, that peaks between 6 and 12 weeks. Pregnancy specific anxiety is clinically the highest in your first trimester. Morning sickness, all of these things. And we have designed that around a culture that asks women to experience it entirely alone. So I guess a good way to finish this would be matrescence begins when nobody knows yet. And we think that that's worth talking about.
Thank you. I love that. And I feel like going back to myself 6 months ago is actually quite healing to talk about it in this way. So thank you for what you've shared. Do we have a term that we want to retire?
I think morning sickness.
Please. There's
Okay.
no such thing as just morning sickness. And again, I think that term trivializes it. Morning sickness, this is intense nausea. And for some women, this is vomiting throughout the day to the point they are depleted and need medication and medical intervention.
Yeah,
So
some women are hospitalized. It's not a joke. It's brutal.
it's totally brutal. So this idea that it's just a little bit of morning sickness, like you see in a Hollywood film, just a quick, vomiting in a trash can on the way to work, total lie. It's all day. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't work on any kind of time schedule. We've got to retire it. And the idea that it's just a little bit of sickness, it's completely inaccurate. So goodbye, morning sickness. Let's talk about the reality of this, which is an all day, often really debilitating nausea and sickness and isolating as hell.
What we should rebrand morning sickness as is the most neurobiologically intense period.
Yes,
Let's reframe it as that. That's way more accurate of what's actually happening than just a little bit of
I
morning
love that.
sickness, as you said.
The most neurobiologically intense period. Yes, love that. What a note to end on. Thank you for the conversation. And I
Thank
hope that
you. And
anyone
thank you for being so open and sharing.
if I can help anyone feel even 1% less lonely than I did in my first trimester, it's worth it. So, stories that might seem maybe embarrassing or like a total overshare and then cause a vulnerability hangover, it's worth it.
Thank you all for joining us today.
If you've taken something from this episode, we'd be so grateful if you shared it with a friend.
We'd also love to hear from you. Find us on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And please share your questions, comments, and experiences. This is a conversation we want to build together.
Until next time.